Hi, welcome to probably a chapter that maybe should have been put a little bit earlier, based on some of the comments and questions I've got on chapter 4 and 5. Maybe this would have helped you figure out some things. But here it is anyhow. But now it's how we're going to test and debug a PHP application. So we're going to try to apply your testing and debugging capabilities. We'll look at how do you trace PHP application using echo statements. If you're using an IDE like NetBeans, I highly recommend it. But if you're not, you can do a lot with echo statements and things to get troubleshoot. Reminds me of the old days programming in some very ancient languages back in the 70s and 80s that all you had was echo statements. So they work just fine. But if you use an IDE like NetBeans, we'll talk about how to set breakpoints, step through code. So let's just see what happens. And then hopefully you'll be able to understand, knowledge-wise, be able to understand the difference between testing and debugging, a little bit between the different types of errors, syntax, runtime, and logic, and the use of breakpoints and stepping through code. So let's see what happens. Now, this application, or at least this display, has an error in it. Of course, I have to get a message here. Can you tell me what it is? What does it look like? What does it mean? It looks like it must not have it compiled, or at least it has no syntax errors. Otherwise, PHP would be screaming. So that part's right. But there's something wrong with this, and what is it? Let's look at it a second. I mean, some of it looks fairly okay. Well, guess what? It says product description. Now, remember our database. What's our database at? I'm thinking about a product. I'm thinking about what is my specific guitar. Yeah, so you would look at more of a specific item, not just one of our categories. So it's no longer a product, it's a category, so that's where this error is. So this is a difference between a syntax error versus a logic error. So when we're trying to test code, we're trying to find all the errors. Now granted, can we find every single error? The answer is probably no. But I want to capture most of what the average user of the site's going to use prior to it going into production. Because your goal is to fix all that stuff before it goes out there. Because the later into the process, the more it costs to fix problems, and customer satisfaction goes down. So it becomes harder and more expensive to fix problems later in the field, especially if they're released to the field. So there's basically three basic steps. You've got you want to make sure the user interface, make sure it works correctly. Then you want to make sure that I want to test the application so that all valid inputs work. So you want to make sure that if I say, hey, I want to make sure I got alphanumeric characters going in the field, that when I type alphanumeric characters, I get what I want. But then what you want to do is say, hey, what happens if I put in special characters? Or I want to try to break it where somebody could make something different, put in a price that's outside of a range that'll store in the database, quantity that's not realistic. So you want to try to make the application fail. Now, there's three kind of errors that can occur. One, it's syntax. I mean, that one's you're just violating a rule on how PHP statements are written. Those are usually the easiest to catch because most of the tools that we use to develop our code will indicate those. You have runtime errors. Now, they don't violate syntax, so all the syntax clean, but either the PHP interpreter gives you a display error message or it stops execution. Now, what always most difficult ones to get, I shouldn't say most difficult, but when I'm talking about runtime errors, is when I don't get a displayed error and it just stops execution. So you think it ran, but you know it didn't finish, but it didn't tell you why. Those get a little hard to detect. And then you got logic errors. So the syntax correct, there's no runtime, they run, but they produce the wrong results. Similar to the example I just showed you. Having a category versus a product listed. So, now here's another set of code that has an error, and it's actually one of the more common ones. Can you see it? Take a look at it. Give you a second. You got an if statement, right? So I got an if statement. As my cursor comes back. There it is. What should these be? Because what does this tell me? This says I'm assigning null to list price or false to the list price. So this and this end up saying they're not checking for equality. They're actually making an assignment. So it's code that, yep, it can, now this hopefully would be a syntax error. So if you do it in NetBeans, you'd get an indicator that's an error. But now sometimes the problem, here's the statement that's got the problem, but the message, the red circle here indicates you've got an error, and it lists the line of code where it first had trouble with this. Now, this statement might not be the one that's having the difficulty. You have to look further up. In this case, it's back up here where my problem is. So the circle indicates the first time the line had a problem, but you might want to go back and check previous lines of code to find out what the actual error is. Now, some common syntax errors, misspelling of keywords, forgetting opening and closing parentheses, brackets, braces, blah, blah, blah. Forgetting to end a PHP statement with a semicolon. Forgetting to opening and closing quotations. Not using the same opening and closing quotation. If I use this double quote, I got to finish with a double quote. So make sure that. Sometimes with variable names, you misspell it. Incorrectly capitalized. Maybe you use a keyword as a variable name. So these are some of the more common mistakes, and this is stuff that NetBeans can help you with identifying. Now, Notepad++ does some of this, but NetBeans will do a whole lot more. Now, there are also problems with the values. Is it the right type? If I ask for character, am I giving numeric? Or if I'm expecting scientific notation, so am I giving it right? So am I giving it character where I'm expecting numeric? And then also, like the one we saw in the example, am I doing an assignment when I'm trying to test for equality? So you want to make sure those are some of the common mistakes as far as syntax and potentially logic errors. Now, how do I trace this execution? Now, granted, you can use NetBeans and you can, set breakpoints, and we'll get into that a little bit later, and step through the code. But you also can do it with echo statements. And that's what you see here is I'm setting a series of echo statements in here so that I know in this case, what am I asking for? I'm getting what my data values are and telling me where I am in the code. So when I run the routine, I get messages to know what is the value along the way and where am I in the loop. Here I'm going through this loop 5 times and you're seeing the value change every single time. And so putting, either breakpoints or echo statements in to check the value along the way is a good debugging tool. Now, if you have a code editor, like in this case NetBeans, you can set breakpoints. So instead of putting a bunch of echo statements in, like we did up here, you can say, I'm going to set a breakpoint. Well, how do I set a breakpoint? Well, if you go to the line of code you want and you press, left click the line number, you'll see it says it looks like it's a red square on this, but it's actually a red square. And if you look at it closely, a little bit of break in between it. So it's a breakpoint. So that means as this code is executing, it's going to stop right there. It won't go any farther, so it'll go up to that point. Now, based on your code, don't be surprised that maybe a breakpoint is never hit, which then it says, oh, I don't have the breakpoint sent soon enough or earlier enough in the process, in the program, to catch my potential error. So once I get to a certain breakpoint, all of a sudden now I can start seeing the values of all the parameters. What are all the variable names? I get a list of the variables, what type they are, what values they are, so then I can tell if something, what I'm expecting to happen does. I can click the call stack routine, which will actually say, hey, what program called me? If it was called from someone else, it gives you the call stack. Which one, which routine, which function, which one called me? Which one go through? Now some toolbar, buttons and shortcuts. You can pretty much do this any way you want, but just thought I posted they're in your textbook. Actually, that's where I copied it out of it, just to give you a quick reference to some shortcuts. Now, here's where we clicked the call stack, and it says, how did I get here? Well, I got get categories, and it was called by index PHP. So I get which routine got me to calling get categories function. So it gives me the sequence of functions that called to where I am, where this actual breakpoint is. So hopefully this gives you a quick and dirty method to troubleshooting. Not rocket science, but some of these tools, setting the breakpoints, putting echo statements in, making sure that your syntax is correct. Look at some of the common errors on the loops, making sure that you've checked your end conditions. Your start and end conditions, are they correct? Does your loop end? So a lot of these things are that you'll learn a lot of as you go along, but I think it should be a little beneficial. Hopefully you had some fun with this, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.